Bridgetown and its garrison. Big it up, our military, we celebrate for centuries of history.
Big it up.
Tradition and culture, our heritage, historic Bridgetown and its garrison.
Pick it up.
Our Bridgetown, jewel in our crown, worldwide renowned, from Garrison to Kensington.
Pick it up.
This meeting place, this melting pot, this entry point for the builders of our nation. Historic Bridgetown and its garrison. Big it up, our military, we celebrate for centuries of history.
Pick it up.
Tradition and culture, our heritage, historic Bridgetown and its garrison.
Pick it up.
Our Bridgetown, jewel in our crown, worldwide renowned, from Garrison to Kensington.
Pick it up.
This meeting place, this melting pot, this entry point for the builders of our nation. Historic Bridgetown and its garrison. Big it up, our military, we celebrate for centuries of history.
Pick it up.
Tradition and culture, our heritage, historic Bridgetown and its garrison.
Good evening and welcome to one of the closing events in the celebration of Heritage Month here in Barbados. The month of June, since the start, or I should say the recognition of Barbados and Bridgetown and its historic garrison as a UNESCO World Heritage Site, June has become designated as the Heritage Month. One of the fantastic activities they were closing the month with was the Barbadian Book Challenge. I don't know about you, but there were so many different lockdowns, shut-ins, and curfews. What else were we going to do after we watched everything on Netflix but return to our bookshelves and pick up those books that we had bought but never read or felt that we needed a refresher? And since we've spent so much time doing that, we thought, let's see what you've been reading. And if you finish reading everything in your bookshelf, maybe this evening's discussion might suggest to you what you can read next, because there are so many exciting titles out there by Barbadian authors that you may know, you may not know. And, you know, we always think of some of the old-time writers. This evening, I think we'll be speaking with some more recent authors, one, and two, some more recent titles that, you know, you need to add to your bookshelf if you haven't done. This evening, we'll be speaking with Dr. Denise Charles, Donna Avery, Miss Linda Dean, and Mr. Andy Tate. We'll be looking at Barbadian books of their own selection, perhaps their favorites, we never know. But they're the ones they're saying to us that we should be reading, and they let us know what's in it. At least I'm going to ask for a sneak peek. And then they're going to discuss a lot more as to what they found about it as it pertains to Barbadian heritage and maybe why we should read it. And if we've read it before, maybe we should give it a reread with new eyes and new thoughtfulness. I've always thought that it's very important that we capture
our Bridgetown, jewel in our crown, worldwide renowned, from Garrison to Kensington.
Forever.
This meeting
and I
place,
personally,
this
I don't write
melting pot,
something, it
this
has to
century
never
point
happen.
for the builders of our nation. Historic
So
Bridgetown
sit back and
and its
relax as
garrison.
we take you
Pick it
down
up.
the road
Our
into
military,
some
we
Barbadian
celebrate
stories
for
and some
centuries of
Barbadian
history.
authors. I am DeCarla Applewhite, and I will be the moderator for this
historic
panel.
Bridgetown
I'll
and
take a
its
moment to
garrison.
introduce you to our fantastic panelists. They're
Our
all good
Bridgetown,
friends of
jewel
mine.
in our
I
crown,
grew up
worldwide
with them.
renowned, from
Don't
Garrison
laugh,
to
Linda.
Kensington.
They've all been part of my
This meeting place, this melting
of my
pot, this century point for the builders of our
journey from my
nation.
days of
Historic
working in
Bridgetown
cultural
and its
activity, things like the
garrison.
Lit
Pick it
Festival,
up.
sitting on
Our
editorial
military, we
committees,
celebrate
and of
for
course on the
centuries
Pullman
of
Literary
history.
Endowment Committee.
Tradition and culture,
One of my great
our
peers,
heritage,
and someone I
historic
met many years ago,
Bridgetown
and I've
and
always
its
been quite
Garrison.
Dr. Denise Charles. She's an experienced educator, having taught from the secondary to tertiary levels, and now she's the education officer with a special responsibility for
the builders of our nation. Historic Bridgetown and its garrison. Big it up. Our military we celebrate for centuries of history. Tradition and culture, our heritage. Historic Bridgetown and its garrison.
Books that you can pick up. And this evening she'll be speaking about a dear friend and former colleague of mine. Her book,
This meeting place, this melting pot, this century point for the builders of our nation. Historic Bridgetown and its garrison. Big it up. Our military we celebrate for centuries of history. Tradition and culture, our heritage. Historic Bridgetown and its garrison.
Such as Yahoo,
Our Bridgetown jewel in our crown, worldwide renowned, from Garrison to Kensington.
For their
This meeting
business
place, this melting pot,
in
this
June
century point for the
2010,
builders of our nation. Historic Bridgetown and its garrison. Big it up. Our military we celebrate for centuries of history. Tradition and culture, our heritage. Historic Bridgetown and its garrison.
A title, Barbados' Most Wanted, by Kim Ramsey. We have with us also Mr. Andy Tate. Usually, is the thorn and the rose discussion, but he sits amongst us this evening. Mr. Tate has been an editor and bookseller since 1978, opening the doors of Black Rock Books in St. Michael. You can find scarce, out-of-print, and rare Caribbean books. Ariane, you need to mute your mic. Ariane, mute your mic.
Our Bridgetown jewel in our crown, worldwide renowned, from Garrison to Kensington.
Where you
This
can find
meeting
scarce,
place, this
out-of-print, and
melting
rare
pot,
Caribbean
this
books.
century
You
point
find
for the builders of our
Spanish,
nation.
and
Historic Bridgetown and its
books in the shop
garrison. Big it
extend
up.
to African
Our
diaspora
military
and
we
to
celebrate
sources of
for
indentation.
centuries of
Now, Andy is also a
history.
member of the prestigious Frank Colon
Tradition
Museum
and culture,
and is
our
well known for
heritage.
his workshops in editing. And last but not least, Miss Linda Dean. She's a Barbadian literary activist, also known as the summer storyteller. That's a great juxtaposition. I just like fight with the books, like fight with the books. But let's take a moment to turn a page gently. The great image there, Linda. She's one half of Publishing and Culture Forum, Arts, etc., and the co-editor with Robert Edison Sandiford of Shouts from the Outfield, the Arts, etc., Cricket Anthology. 2007, Linda. Got you. She's a multiple winner of the Frank Collymore Literary Endowment Award and a past recipient of the Barbados' Governor General's Award for Literacy Excellence. Her poetry and essays appear in several publications, including BIM Arts for the 21st Century, MoCo, Interview in the Caribbean, the Cordite Poetry Review, and most recently, Pre-Lit. She also writes for children. Linda's a founding member of Writers Inc., a co-producer of the What's That You're Reading radio series for Writers Inc., and served as a coordinator of the BIM Lit Fest Children's Fair. She's the creator of Read to Me, Arts, etc. School Literacy Outreach Program as the summer storyteller. She takes her passion for words into schools, camps, and communities with groups, individuals, and has mentored achieving success at NIFCA. Ladies and gentlemen, this will be our full panel this evening. And following on from Linda, I am going to open the baton with Dr. Denise Charles.
Hi, good evening.
Good evening,
How are
Denise.
you?
How are you? I'm fine. How are you?
I'm great, thanks.
Wonderful. What took you to choose to discuss tonight Zoan's In the Shade of the Shot Tree?
Well, I tend to love books that are nostalgic, and I love books that point very much to our Barbadian experience, but in a very easy way, a easy read way. And I found Zoan's book to be one that fits that bill very well. You know, it is a wonderful collection of reflections written in a very easy style, but yet very descriptive and very evocative of emotion. You know, there's something very familiar about the readings when you read them. And well, I guess you're in my age group or maybe just below my age group, you see that Barbados that we all in that age group remember. When I read her book, when I read several of the stories and the poems, it felt like my own reading because I've written a few stories like this myself. And, you know, very much back in the day, yet chronicling those emotions and that sense of nostalgia and what we've all missed about Barbados since we've become so developed and advanced in the 21st century. So it's pulling at the heartstrings. I find the work to be work that is pulling at the heartstrings and attempting to remind us of almost a paradise lost that we need to regain as much as we can.
Wonderful. Which poem, is it a book of poems?
It's a book of poetry and prose. So there are short stories. It begins with short stories, and then about midway, there are poems as well. So very similar themes throughout. But yes, I read some of the short stories and some of the poems. I love them.
Well, I love a good short story, and what I always found about even about Zoan's work, because I've read quite a few of her pieces through the years as she's entered stuff, is that complete mix. And I think it comes from that whole educational basis, you know, where when we had like our Caribbean readers, and our Caribbean readers have stories about, you know, you just have stories about Trinidad.
Characters.
Yeah,
and then characters and so on. Yep.
That's right. And then, you know, you just ease into a nice flow of poetry to slow down that pace, maybe from that story. And then, you know, you go back into another story. It really has something for everyone in terms of their literary choice.
That's right.
And it's always a very easy read. What I think, what would draw anyone to it is the name initially, and you will just pull it off the shelf because the shack.
The shade of the shack. The idea that you're just going to relax and reflect and ruminate under the cool shade of a shack tree, and you're going to remember days gone by. You're gonna have periods of wistfulness. You know, it's going to be filled with dreams and aspirations. And really her stories have those very common themes that we find in Caribbean literature. The whole idea of dreaming for a different future, dreaming for a better future, even as we reflect and we ruminate on what we've lost in the past. So there's that juxtaposition in the stories and in the poems of loss and then redemption. You know, there's the whole idea, we see several themes, you know, love and relationships. We have lots of broken relationships and so on. We have abuse, we have domestic abuse, we have sexual violence. So we have all of these things hinted at, things that we are very familiar with in terms of our sociocultural experiences as Caribbean people. These are things as Barbadians that we very much identify as a part of our past, but the work is not, you know, there's judgment of these behaviors, but it is not burdened by them because it is balanced against reflecting on the good times as well. So the reflections on playing in the open fields and, you know, picking fruit from the trees and all the different games we played as children, the little things we did, the little naughty things that we did as we grew up, you know, the relationships we had with our grandparents, all of those things are also represented in the story. So even though you do have, you know, the negative representations, it is balanced against the beauty as well. So there's always that juxtaposition in her work.
So yeah, that whole sense of real life and, you know, and where we started and where we're going, and then obviously back to laugh ourselves.
This meeting place, this melting pot, this century point for the builders of our nation. Historic bridge down and its garrison. Big it up.
could be read after secondary school, and they could also be read at university. You know, it's all
our
about
heritage, historic Bridgetown, and its garrison.
When I look at the story, there's some that really
Our
stood out to me.
Bridgetown, jewel in our crown, worldwide renowned.
Letter to a Prodigal Sister, and that's a very short one, but it's talking about, you know, a sister who left and went overseas to pursue a better life. And that's a common theme that we know in the Caribbean. Many people leaving to go to the developed countries. And the author herself, because I think these stories are very much reflective of the life of the author herself, and knowing a bit about her life, she did leave at some point and go to Paris. So you get that sense of her own life being very much represented in the stories, her own experiences, as well as experiences that we could all identify with as Caribbean people. So that idea of traveling, going away, being given advice by the grandparents, you know, about what to avoid and what not to do in the big bad world. You know, the whole juxtaposition of the knowledge of books versus the knowledge of experience. But that story, that short story, Letter to a Prodigal Sister, talks about that. The sister who went away and never looked back, more or less. But the remaining sister was left to do everything. You know, that type of the type of trauma that a broken relationship like that would cause. But there was another one that really, really stood out to me. Oh, this was poignant. When Mama Don't Write. When Mama Don't Write. When Mama Don't Write chronicles the story of Sophie first. We get the story of Sophie, who we hear the Sophies of this world, you know, the girls who, you know, they come up, they become industrious, maybe they plot here to make money, and, you know, they're the ones who seem a bit hardened, they have their lives going in a particular way, but really and truly there's a lack of self-esteem, and there's some challenges there because of their own brokenness or their own social realities. And then we learn Sophie gets pregnant. You know, the story doesn't chronicle everything that happens to Sophie, but we just get snippets of what has happened to Sophie. And at the end of the day, we see the connection between Sophie and her mother, because her mother had a similar experience where she too was abused. So it goes from Sophie's story to the mother's story. And the mother was also one who was actually sexually abused by her stepfather. No one believed her, and she ended up bearing him a child. Then she had other children for other men, because that sort of pulls her into a life of promiscuity. And to get away from it all and that sense of brokenness, she leaves. She jumps at an opportunity and she goes to Canada to pick fruit, and she never looks back. She leaves her children, I believe, probably with her mother or whatever she leaves, and she never looks back. And she establishes this whole new life overseas. And you know, it started with Sophie, but then we understood how Sophie's neglect by her mother, the same mother, and then we understand the mother's story. So there's the whole idea of the vicious cycle that we're so familiar with in the Caribbean. Yeah, a very poignant story and very, very sad, but very reflective of a lot of the experiences that we know have happened to many of, you know, many people in our villages, or maybe even to some of us. Those experiences have happened.
That's really good, because what you usually find, it gives you that backstory. What
That's, you know,
right. This writer has given that backstory, that so many things that we just see something happen, you know, and you know, on the shady shot tree, like, you did wanna go along, so if you did, so she even look back, and nobody remembers or even knows all of these things happened.
The connected things that caused that to happen.
That whole domino effect. So for us in a Caribbean sense, it really brings these things to a fore in a format that we can actually digest.
Yeah, and that's the thing about Zoan's writing. It's like, it's almost like if she's sitting down there with you and she's telling you this thing, but you know, so and so and so and so did this because so and so, you know, so there's that very conversational, you know, it's not highfalutin in any way. It's very, very conversational, very easy to follow, very simple, but very deep and very profound because of the because of what is being revealed, and you know, because of all the implications of what is being revealed. Run Baby Run, another one that deals with broken relationships. We see a woman who's being abused by her partner, and you know, she's been hiding it. She's not been telling people where the bruises and so on have been coming from. And she meets a social worker who pushes her to do the right thing, and eventually she is able to get away. So the story more or less chronicles that whole journey of this woman from staying and being abused to mounting up the courage to get away from the man, from her abuser. And there's that sense of God, and there's that sense of hope at the end of the story, you know, the image of the moon and so on being revealed from the clouds, I guess, is sort of foretelling that she's moving into new light. She's moving into a new path, a new life that's going to be better for herself as she gets away from this man. So that idea of brokenness is very much represented in very, very many of her stories. When Bonnie left Winslow, another one of a broken relationship. That's in the short story section. There are other types of short stories as well, but I guess because of time, we won't be able to look at all of them. But
well, we need them. We just needed you to point us to the best 3 to start with.
Right, that's right. So those are 4.
You know, we have no reason not to pick up that book now.
I recommend those highly.
Thank you so much, Denise.
No problem.
That was fantastic. This is a fantastic piece of fiction, of course, but of course, like any good piece of fiction, it does start from a basis of truth and life experiences, and rather than get too scientific with it, it just puts it into that realm. So we're really glad for that. We really appreciate that description, and I'm assuring you that more people will be heading to the library too to pick up that title if they can't pick it up.
In the Shade of the Shack Shack.
In the Shade of the Shack Shack. We're going to move away from that whole idea of fiction writing, and we're going to go into nonfiction writing. But I know that Don is going to agree with me that it is as snuggle up with a cup of tea when you get home from work, or even in your lunchtime. We read this in our lunchtime at work, and I'm a fantastic reader, and I stood in the middle of my office and read some of these chapters, and I was absolutely fascinated with the story of Mark Young. When I meet you in person, Donna, I'll tell you why. But I would have been living in Barbados for like 2 years when that happened. I was still a primary school student when that whole thing. So it's kind of like etched in my mind. And Donna's going to share with us one of Kim Ramsey's titles. Kim is a criminologist here in Barbados, and is Barbados's Most Wanted. It's a fantastic new book. She has another one that has come out and is as easily as interesting, but let's get some insight into Barbados's Most Wanted. Okay. Hi, Donna.
Hi, Dakota. Thanks for having me, introducing me. Barbados's Most Wanted is not a light read. I have to say that. My daughter said to me, why are you going to share that one tonight? But I really found it's a very important read. And it's, I don't know what the audience's age is, but you seem a little lot younger than me. But I remember as I was growing up, some of these stories that I saw in her book about, Buddy Brathwaite and Mr. Hall and some of these people that are notorious in Barbados's history. And what I found very fascinating about the book, first of all, because my first book was called What Do You Have in Your House? And it really is about using what gifts and abilities and skills you have to generate revenue for yourself. The fact that Kim is a criminologist, and she used what she had in her house, her knowledge of criminology and her research methods and all that, to create a book. I'm not saying she did it specifically to earn revenue, but I hope she certainly earned some revenue from it. But I found that really good, because a lot of us as authors, we love to write, but in terms of making it a business, it's not something that we think a lot about. We like the art, but we really need to combine the art with the business. So I like that, the fact that Kim used what she had to create a revenue generating stream, and she's doing it again. So that was one thing. And then secondly, the research that went into it, it was amazing. I mean, I have done research for my history books, and I know what it takes, and it kind of consumes you. So I guess at some point you have to stop. But the details, not just because of the activities of the criminal and so on, but the background, I found that was very important in bringing the book together. And the reason I've actually chosen to talk about this book is because we're facing some of the very same challenges, and some of the things that she concluded at the end of the book. So having read through the book, and you've heard the stories, you've heard about the shootouts and so on, but then seeing the backstory of these criminals, what caused them, what drove them. And I'm not saying that everybody who starts with a challenge background ends up as a criminal. I guess it depends on your circumstances, your character, and those kind of things. But it was very interesting, I found, in her conclusion that there was so much similarity in the 11 men that she highlighted, and many of them had challenged backgrounds. Some of them were fatherless, and some of them, if they did have fathers, they were absentee fathers, and sometimes they were in a house with mother and a stepfather, and then they were abused by the stepfather or even neglected by the mother. And a lot of we talked earlier about the cycle. I've always heard it said that hurt people hurt people. So a lot of these men were very hurt young men, and they started into crime at a very young age. Maybe started with petty theft and various small, what you would call small crimes. But then as they got older, they began to get into more serious crimes. And a lot of that, from Kim's research, can be traced back to the social upbringing and the environment that they found themselves in, peer pressure and other things that we see repeated now, because right now we're going through a spate of crime, which is very disturbing to everybody. But we need to learn from the history. Really, we need to learn from our history. And Kim has documented this so well, showing us some of the patterns that cause young men, especially, not saying young women are exempt, but primarily young men to turn to lives of crime. So we need to take that and not just read it and say, okay, this was a really gripping book. Yes, it was gripping. Actually, very disturbing. I couldn't sleep well that night when I finished the book, to tell the truth. I found it very disturbing. But I think having read it, we need to now take that information and say, okay, what do we need to do with that? I remember years ago, before I had children, so this is going back over 25 years, there was something being set up. I think it's called the Juvenile Liaison Scheme, if I'm not incorrect. And where they were going to pair, like adults with younger children and like have a mentor, big brother, big sister kind of relationship for children who were, on the fringes, who are at risk and whatever. I have to say that my husband and I had signed up. We were all excited to get somebody to run with, but it really took so long to happen that by the time it was ready, I was pregnant and we couldn't go ahead with it. But there are things like that I think are really important in terms of providing fathers and mothers who might not necessarily be natural parents, but people who can come alongside at-risk individuals and encourage them, love them. I think one of the things that Kim mentioned, and we tend to kind of scoff over this sometimes, the importance of love. And you think, these men really need love. They do. Everybody needs love. And what she also noticed was that love was very much absent in some of the backgrounds of these young men. So things like just having somebody who can come alongside you, who can invest their time in your life, who can love you, who can help you to create a better sense of self-worth, who can lead you in the right direction. I think we need to really find ways to get that done. We have a lot of social organizations. We have many churches. I really think it's time for the church to come out from the walls and get into the communities and begin to provide fathers and mothers for some of these young and hurting children, youth, because they really need somebody. And, as a result, they turn to maybe a gang. They might go to, be led astray by peers. But I really feel that we need to find ways to engage with the guys on the block and the people who are at risk and so on. And I find that a lot of these young people just need role models. They really just need somebody to really take an interest in them and to work with them and help them to move on to the next level. And I remember watching a video with a lady from the House of Jabez when she was saying that she started out as a very poor situation. And then somebody came along and invested in her and helped her through school and paid for her university and so on. And now she's turning around and doing the same thing. She's helping other young ladies to come out of their situations. So we really need more of that, where people we have become so isolated, so involved in self, that we really need to take a look at what is out there and what we need to do, how we can go out there and use our gifts, our abilities, our time, our resources to really make an impact on some of these young people in the society, so that we don't have a repeat of the Buddy Brackett's, the Winston Halls, the Mark Youngs, and so on, as we are already seeing happening right now.
Yeah, I think, they exist in a sense of folklore, and because they exist in a sense of folklore, people would put them on this magical pedestal, for lack of a better description, and not get into the nitty-gritty. I for one, I know, being a member of the Government Industrial Schools Board, you know, we always discuss like what are the patterns and how we can nip things in the bud. And I mean, there were several organizations that were involved in terms of nurturing young people whilst there. But as you're saying, how can we get them nurtured before they find themselves in that position? And honestly, in terms of the stories of Mark Young and Alfred Hardin, who was his partner for sure, you know, they knew each other from boys. Even in that situation, that took them into their adulthood. And I mean, to have captured these stories in terms of telling their stories, because I mean, even when you hear about these stories, you don't actually think of them as people in the society. And I think what all of the books, I mean, we only introduced two so far. So Lyndon and Andy can jump in at any time, but that they put real people back in perspective and make them actually tangible people.
Yes.
Yes, please, Linda.
Can I say something? First of all, I think without even colluding or plotting, the four of us have chosen books that are so interconnected, span the genres, but they're all about, for me, cycles and breaking cycles. This is whether we've chosen poetry, nonfiction, novels, or whatever. But I remember way back when, this is going on in the 1980s and 1990s, I used to work at The Nation. And I maintain that it's the court pages and the classifieds, the obits, sell the papers, right? I remember being really upset one time having to pull down a set of pages that I was doing stories about Martin Luther King because they just captured Winston Hall. So they tore down the pages about Martin Luther King Day because they captured Winston Hall, and that had to make the front pages and all available other internal pages. And when I was looking up Kim's book, I was wondering, maybe that is the vehicle that we need to take that folklore surrounding these men born into crime, taking them off that pedestal of folklore, making them seem a bit more real, especially with the other book that she's written as more from the victim's point of view. Mm-hmm. And just making it more real and suggesting to us how we break that cycle. And Zoan's book is talking about cycles and breaking cycles. Kim's book is showing us that cycle. I think all this, Andy's selection, I think mine as well in a strange way. I just wanted to say that. Fascinating.
Thank you, Linda. Because yes, those linkages are indeed happening. And if you see the themes, of course, that are bringing your books together, that's great and that's fine. We can all discuss it from that perspective and that point of view. And I think we're building up with. I remember one of your pieces in one of the BIM magazines talking about I think inspired by our parents in the diaspora, or even our experiences in the diaspora as children growing up in lands afar, and taking it and like, you know, just make it, you have made it so real. And I think, you know, in essence, that's what makes it important for people to pick up the pen to write these stories, and also for us to encourage persons to read. So even for yourself, Linda, when you chose Timothy Calendar, I'm sorry, whenever you think Timothy Calendar, you go straight to Wendy, the Honest Thief. But I remember Kofi Okobi talking about when they put this on as a play, how music came to the Asian people. So, you know, we made the linkages of themes in terms of empowerment and resilience, and empowerment in terms of knowing our past and our immediate past, where the two other books we've discussed. But please, in terms of how music came to the Asian people and juxtaposing it against these two newer titles.
Okay. Well, it's so strange. Thanks for this invitation to do this. When I was thinking of a book, I don't understand why my hand automatically went to how music came from the ancient people. It's been on my bookshelf since 1983. It's signed by Timmy Callender. So you know that this book is precious to me, precious. And I read it then, I read it again in the 90s, and I started rereading it again for this event. And something that Robert Sanderford, my business partner and the novelist and short story writer, said to me once is that, okay, somebody had said that my life seemed like a novel to them, whereas their life was reading more like an like an owner's manual, right? And they wish that they had a novel as their life. And Robert was saying to me that maybe novels make the best instruction manuals on how to live a life, surprisingly. And I think that this is an instruction manual. It's an adventure story. It's not sci-fi. It is speculative fiction. It is action adventure. It is an environmental novel. It is full of philosophy. I think Timmy Callender's philosophy on how we might live our lives, reconnect to the past, as you were saying to Carla, being back in touch with ancient ways, how to interact with each other as humans, but also how we fit into nature, how we fit into the environment. So he's got these huge ideas, but he set it as an action adventure quest. I remember when I was at school having the teacher read The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings to us. And I still remember that feeling, sitting in the classroom and hearing this story just fill my senses. And Timmy Callender's How Music Came to the Ancient People has that same effect on me. Briefly, you want a synopsis?
For those who may not know the book.
Okay, well, we have a hero. What I like about it is it's also an exercise in storytelling. So there's a narrator, there's an audience in the book, and you also have your three main characters that also tell their version of events. And the main one is Shangadum, who leaves Ancient as a rebel, as an 18-year-old rebel against the Dominos who are oppressing, enslaving the ancient people. He goes into exile, and over a course of, say, 20 or 30 years, he acquires knowledge, wisdom, skills, a wife and a child, and he becomes equipped with these magical instruments. Actually, it's musical instruments. He discovers the drum, the power of the drum. His wife discovers the power of the stringed instrument, and his son discovers the power of the wind instrument. And basically what Timmy Callender is doing is presenting the idea of how music, or the arts of thought, or feeling, or rather rhythm, harmony, and melody could be used as instruments for peace, for understanding, for better human relations, but also to reclaim the self from oppression. And the ideas in it sound wieldy, but what Timmy, to me, has done is presented it in this adventure quest mode. So it becomes exciting, it becomes an adventure story. In my viewing of it and my reading of it now 2.5 times. I am moved a great deal by the writing, by Timmy's use of language. We know him foremost as this writer of humorous short stories,
yeah.
Right? It so happened, but this man was also writing graphic novels. He was writing nonfiction. I also have a book of his called Elements of Art, in which there's a very brief volume in which he argues how anybody involved in the arts, but specifically writers, should be approaching their art and art form and communication and so forth. So this man was about communication and about to me, survival, how humans are to fit into their natural landscape, into the environment. But he was exploring his ideas right across the genres of writing. The passages where Shangadun and his family actually discover these musical instruments are so magical. I tend to overuse the word magical, but the writing is imaginative. It's so expressive. We're familiar with the drum, with the guitar, and with the flute, but when Timmy describes them, it's as if the reader is rediscovering or discovering these instruments for themselves for the first time. It's within this, through the lens of these instruments as weapons for peace, but also tools for reconnecting an individual to himself, to the land, to the past, to history, and just basically, how to live. Yeah. It's yeah.
Got me wanting to read that, Linda, by the way.
Yeah.
Andy, I hope you have a copy in your bookshop, because I hear you have old books from that there.
Well, this is it. Yeah. I mean, it's flawed. I would say that there are flaws in it. I mean, it is the parts of it that are outdated. I mean, there are views about gender, the roles of men and women, and what a wife is, what a husband is, the roles of men and women. I think that if this book was being written and published today, it would come in for some criticism, especially from LGBTQ readers. But the overarching message is we need to get back to the land. We need to get back to nature and to ourselves.
I like that. I think that's a theme. Yes, Andy, unmute yourself. Unmute my Andy.
Yeah.
Yep, back on mute.
I think two things about, I knew Timmy and I knew when he was writing that book. I think two things that are helpful to know is that he was very impressed with a book called The Voice by Gabriel Okara. So much so that he named his son Okolo after the main character in The Voice, for one thing. And the other thing is about how music, he often pronounced it how music came to the ancient people, with that sort of eye of, as in Rastafari, so like you might bear that in mind.
Mm.
Thank you.
You didn't have to disappear, Andy. I want to get your introduction of Arnold's book.
Okay.
Give us a little insight into it, so we can open the floor and discuss amongst us really all of the themes that are coming out of it, how we're seeing the importance in terms of the Barbadian story. I know we've discussed before a little bit about the idea of heritage, but it's like, how important is the libretto for the Barbadian culture and to capture heritage? And, it's always like a time capsule is a book. You knew Timothy, and I know you know Arnold.
Yes, I do. And I'm good to go?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, okay. And I'm surprised that so few people seem to read him, because he's written like 6 or 7 books, right? And some of them are quite good. Now this one that I chose, how Knock and Wait, sorry.
Mm-hmm.
Can't get more than 2 ideas in my head at one time. Knock and Wait. It turns out to be quite the heritage book. He talks about the ginger squeezer, right? He talks about comfits and black bitch. There's a character in the book Congo who is a beach bum, sort of like sex tourism. He talks about seamen who go to sea and come back wearing these fine clothes that only seamen could afford to have. These are all things that we don't seem to know a whole lot about anymore. He also talks about some things that I know don't exist in Barbados anymore, like, for example, a useless colonial education. He talks about casual violence against women, and also about women who see opportunity, who see men as opportunity, and who can't see any future for themselves other than to find a man who will sort of like lead them through. And I know we can call that Barbadian heritage because I know we don't do it in Barbados no more these days. What struck me most about the book was that, and I'm reading my own notes, so give me a break, was that all the characters are poor people. Some are poor, some are poor. And, but they're all trying to survive, but they're all still willing to try to help each other. They're all sort of like at least willing to tolerate other people in most cases. He succeeds in showing their lives as like struggle, day-to-day struggle. And whether it's like struggling to survive or struggling to be recognized. There's one character, for example, who goes off into grandiloquent language, the kind of thing that people who aren't so well educated, who feel that their education is lacking, will do to compensate for their thing, right? But through all this, he still manages to treat all these people, poor people, down and out people, working class people. He manages to give all of them a sense of dignity. He never sort of like dismisses them as useless, as wasteful. Even when they themselves seem to be wasting their lives, he tries to find the sort of like the dignity without going the great thing about, oh, great black men, oh, this and everybody is God's child and that sort of thing. Just the plain, common, basic, everyday, down-to-earth dignity that people, I guess as Donna and Denise were saying, the sort of the kind of wholeness that people try to find, right? And he doesn't even use words like that. He doesn't sort of like preach in any way. He just kind of like walks you through their lives, and you see them trying to be human, trying to sort of like catch up, trying to make the world work, right? And in the end, people survive. Nobody triumphs brilliantly, but some of them manage to overcome their ghosts, and at least if they don't overcome their ghosts, they learn to live with their ghosts, and their lives seem a little less chaotic, a little less frenetic. Their lives seem sort of like you are glad to see that they sort of like find some kind of peace, I think I could say. In terms of the writing, like Timothy Callender, some of his women are suspect, although I say that the women are either kind-hearted and generous, or they're scheming and sizing up opportunity. There's the usual sort of like either you're an angel or you're a whore, right? In fact, one woman turns to prostitution. And I'm tempted to think that this is like an easy solution to a problem. But then again, like, you know, women turn to prostitution because like it is a not so easy solution sometimes to their problem, right? And women carry the burden of men. Women see men as a burden. Women, they see them as opportunity, and they see them as pains, really, right? But you got to put it with them because, you know, like you need their money. So, and of course, like there's a twist in the story at the end. Yeah, all of a sudden, you're like, that is who he is. That's the relationship, right? So I guess as a competition judge, I'm always looking for the worst in things, and it's not the perfect novel, but it's actually worth a read. And I think the thing that comes up most about it is that he has this like honest approach to Barbadians. They're not great people, they're not perfect, they're not this, they're not that, but some of them are lowlives, but even the lowlives are trying to be as decent as they possibly can and trying not to be too much of a burden on other people. So it's in a sense a novel of hope, I think, without being a sort of like, oh, you know, like everything will turn out hunky-dory and the rainbow will come and everybody will smile. But it's a great book. I'm done.
Thank you, Andy. So I think everyone has presented each of their selections as novels of hope. And I'm going to play on the word of novel. Novel being a novel, novel even being the new take. As I said, we have a juxtaposition of two I guess the books could be separated into two eras, really. And even based on each other's selections, let me just say, even as Andy was speaking just now, Donna, it took me back to our previous discussion about when we were discussing Kim's book. Denise, when the elements of hardship in Sophie's challenge, it as Andy says, may not be so eloquently put in context in Arnold's book, but the connections are there. What do you think, Denise? I see you shaking your head.
Yeah, definitely I am seeing those connections, and I don't think that we have changed as much as we think that we have, because certainly much of what Andy was saying just now still exists today. You know, we still have transactional relationships. We still have, we have women who are very educated and women who have made advances in their lives, still being very dependent on their emotional security, garnering their emotional security from men, right? And we still have women looking to men for certain things, whether they be tangible things or intangible things. So I think that we still have a lot of, we still see repeated in our experiences today a lot of what has occurred in the past. I am not sure that there's as much change as we think there is. So I think that what that can perhaps help us to do is to examine why that is so. Why is it that even though we have passed so many years, if we have to write some of the stories today about the experiences that we witness or the experiences that we maybe experience vicariously or that we ourselves experience, why there is not that much change from then.
Well, I knew that at some stage in this discussion, I'd get to say, that's why we read Fanon, I mean, like, I marvel every time that a man is writing in 1959 at the age of less than 30 years old and describing us today in ways that we don't seem to understand and that we keep on making those mistakes over and over and over again. Ben Fanon lays out a roadmap for us, like
human condition.
I think it's inherited. I think a lot of it is generational and it's in our DNA. Going back even down to slavery, even this whole fatherlessness and the absentee father and so on. I really feel that comes down from slavery and the way things were set up back then, so that men were not respected by women. They were. If you read some of these books like the Lynch and those kind of books where they talk about how the creation of a slave. I think I can't remember what the actual title was, but the treatment that was meted out to men to dehumanize and also to emasculate. That's right, emasculate them. That I feel that has come through in the genes somehow, or in some kind of generational
memory.
Yes, right. And therefore, it's still very prevalent in our society. So we're still seeing until that gets broken, and we will continue to see that. So those are some of the things I think we really need to address to see those cycles broken.
I mean, all these titles, I'll say, are like written in a post-colonial age, and even what you're talking about in terms of the endemic coming down through what we are in terms of a slave society, but that we have all captured these experiences in books. I don't know if I'm right when Denise, everyone spoke about empowerment, even Linda, as the music came down. But I think the empowerment also each has its own representation. One, I think, Donna, one thing you were saying that we should be learning from our past and building from our past. So not only, it's like we laugh at Austin Moore stories, but at the end of the day, it's like, it's a fable. And
okay, well, what I wanted to say is that coming from Zoan's book, what I found emerging was the sense that while we have lost a lot, we've lost a lot because of our own mistakes. some of those things inherited, some of those things which may seem outside of our control, like the same slavery that Donna referenced just now, and colonialism and all that we've inherited from it, but also that we've made certain choices. We've chosen greed, for example, over sharing. We've chosen materialism. We've allowed ourselves to become, well, what we used to say Americanized, which is now globalized. That is hinted at in her book, even though her book was written, I think, when was it published? I'm not sure, maybe the 90s, could be, right? But, pardon?
I think it's early 2000s.
Early 2000s, okay. And it does go back in terms of some of its, yes, 2005. But the references, and even in some of the poems which you have dated are from the 90s. But that whole idea of us being polluted, as it were, by a foreign culture, as Bajan people, we've allowed that to happen to us. And as a result, we've sort of lost our way. And in many of her stories, there is the idea of redemption. There's the idea of love and forgiveness emerging out of a reconnection to the land, out of a reconnection to God. There's a story about the artist who, became almost commercial in terms of painting the types of things that tourists would want to see him paint. The tourists would buy his paintings. They would never be bought by the local people. And then he lost his job because he had another job as well as a graphic artist. He lost that job, and his paintings began to take on a different tone. They became dark and so on, and very gray and very sorrowful, until he met this woman from overseas who he connected with at a soulmate level. And then his paintings changed again, and he went overseas, and he perhaps met with some success and so on. But in that story is the whole idea of the power that we have when we reconnect to our land, when we reconnect to our values, to reshape our future and to paint, as it were, a different type of future for ourselves, so that there is that need to reconnect, and that must be balanced with personal responsibility. We can't wait for it to happen to us. We must become involved in our own redemption, as it were.
I hold up my hand like a schoolboy. I want to interject two things here. In terms of Donna's reference to the Willie Lynch thing, of course, that the Willie Lynch thing is a hoax, right? I mean, people say that the content might be real, the content might be accurate, but there was no Willie Lynch. This thing suddenly appeared out of nowhere. That's one. Going to what Denise is saying, I often try to walk that line between holding people responsible for their actions and, on the other hand, keeping people ignorant and blaming them for being ignorant. I mean, I know I said in my presentation about the colonial education being a heritage thing because we no longer do that. But I don't actually believe that. I think a lot of our education is still like a colonial education. And the problems that we inherited from colonialism are like continuing with us because we have this, apologies to Donna and the ministry, we have this colonial education. It hasn't really changed all that much,
We haven't let go of the systems.
Yeah.
All these themes I am also picking up in how the music came to the Ainchan people. Have I said that correctly, Andy? Ainchan, I learned something. I learned a beautiful thing today. Thank you for that. Denise, I wanted to ask you a question about, there's a poem in Zoan's collection called We Must Remember. It's about a carpenter, right? I think, is there...
Who will remember? I actually have that one noted.
Who will remember? Right,
That's
and that
right.
jumps out at me as well. Is like
Yes,
the heritage, the passing down of traditions,
Yes.
how we hold our artists. And there's this lament, this passing down, this disappearing culture and customs.
That's right.
And as I said, the beautiful linkages between all four books. In Timmy Calendar's book, the artisans, the potters,
Yes.
the painters, the musicians are elevated, right? There is a certain power given to them. Their work is prized. There was another point that I wanted to make in regard to what Donna was talking about. The families, these young men who don't have love. They need love, and the importance, I guess, the importance of a family unit without actually bashing us over the head. When Timothy Callender has created this family, Shangadoon, his wife Armienne, and the son's name is Uzulu. That's it. He shows us love without actually, being overt, that this is how a loving unit needs to be. This is how you raise a child. This is how you educate a child. You let not that you let the child roam free, but you introduce the child to its natural habitat, to the environment. You let it learn firsthand, get its hands dirty in that education process. You give the child wings in order to develop, and you show that loving relationship. So that young boy grows up in an atmosphere of love and goes on to make his discovery about how the wind moves, and he is able to play this part in this redemption then of Ainshan, of the land of Ainshan. And I like the way that Timmy handles that without saying, without bashing us over the head about what love is. I wanted to ask Andy a question. Am I correct in saying that all these 4 books, they're all self-published? That's my question for Andy. Are they all self-published?
Self-published is a funny word, because self-published used to be Vantage Press and them kind of things. They were like, it was a bad book because nobody would publish it for you.
Yeah.
These days, self-published is a kind of an act of rebellion, a kind of act of sort of like liberation. And sometimes there's still bad books. Arnold's book is self-published, yes. It's published by Sandbox Public Press or something like that, but that's him. Timmy published his own book, yes. I'm not certain about the other 2, and I don't know if you have a publishing company. And if you have a publishing company that you own, are you self-published or are you a publishing company? I don't know. And last thing, Linda, don't get too caught up in the ancient and the ancient. I think there's both.
That's right, because I'm having to wrap my tongue around that Ein. Ainshan. It's all beautiful.
But it's actually reflected, on the Google, as looking at the ancient people, like literally that's what it comes out as.
Yeah,
so I mean, maybe in modern times,
and that is part of it.
Yeah, we're looking back like twice over.
Yes.
When we read
the
text.
Yeah, so it's a beautiful wordplay too, of course.
Yeah. And so in essence, it's ageless, even though it's ancient.
Yeah. I actually do like the idea that without much colluding, and this is if I am right, that we have chosen 4 self-published books. I think we have. And
yes,
that says something to me. That speaks strongly to me.
It does, because like how many more texts are out there? I mean, my former principal of Persian Parry, for instance, he would have written the book on the former Governor General, Elliot Belgrave, and we're going through a process as that also is a self-published book. But I mean, what is very important is that we are capturing the stories that are fueling this particular discussion right now, which leads me to the question, which I'll pose to the panel. What can we do to also instruct or give inspiration for people to capture more stories?
I think I was saying, I think we have to recognize that times have changed and they will continue to change. We are now in the digital age, and because of that, the balance of power with respect to representing art and sharing our art has changed. We've seen it in the music industry, where people no longer have to rely on record labels to get their music out there. So today we don't have to rely on a big publishing house. I'm not saying it may not be everybody's dream to get a book deal, but at the end of the day, we don't have to rely on that to get our writing out there, because the balance of power has changed. We are now, we are living in a knowledge economy. We are our own knowledge workers, and we set the perimeters and the boundaries for what we're going to do with our art. So I think that in many respects, the digital age has empowered writers. And what we need to understand is perhaps how we can go about, the business side, like what Donna was speaking about in terms of making money from it, marketing and branding and all that type of thing. But in terms of encouraging people to write and to tell the story, I mean, I love writing. I love the traditional writing. I love that. I still love books, but we still have to understand that people now are engaging with information in different ways. There's digital storytelling, there's video. People want to listen to podcasts while they're sweeping the house or vacuuming or doing other things. They're just going to put in their AirPods and they're going to listen. So we have to look at audiobooks more, and we have to look at video, creating podcasts out of our own books. Recording it and engaging people with our stories, so that it's not just about picking up the book and reading it from cover to cover as we would have traditionally done over the years, although you will always find people who still prefer to do that. But now people want to engage with words and with narratives through video. They want to engage with it through audio. They want to engage with it through interactions like what we're doing today. So we have to broaden our perspective in terms of how we promote art in the 21st century.
Denise, I want to say to you quickly though, like some people should be discouraged from writing though.
Some should be discouraged from writing?
Should be discouraged from writing. I mean, trust me, there should be.
Well, that's true. You have bad singers, right? You have singers who can't hold a note, right? So you get writers who aren't the best,
Yeah. I would say we have storytellers and we have writers. We have some excellent storytellers, but they need guidance when they say, well, I want to put out my book. They really do need that guidance. I'm for experimenting with different forms of storytelling too. Going back to what I would love to see? If ever we get back to normal and we have a crop over and a kadooman again, a band designer represent this in costume.
That would be beautiful. That would be beautiful.
That would be a different kind of storytelling. I would love to see that. I'm putting that out there.
But that's an excellent idea, Linda, and that's a wonderful way of representing even what we read in stories. Could you see a band representing In the Castle of My Skin? You understand what I'm saying? Or growing up.
Creative challenge.
That, you can pick so much, you can pull so much and visualize, poignant elements of these stories that we're reading.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Some final thoughts from Donna. I'm going to take Donna back to her title, and it was funny because we had that book, and then Rommel Hall would have made the film about Winston Hall, no relation, but it also is a spin-off from Denise's point, where she says we're going into that digital age. So one actually took people from the book to the film, and then some people watched the film and went to the book.
Yes.
So I know, Donna, you know, even in terms of the things that you would have written, even your interest, I should say, in that whole nonfiction, how do you see that we should take that into consideration? What else can we do right now to get those stories out, get those instruction, we'll call them instructional manuals, but they're not out there, those guidance, and looking even as we go forward into the world in terms of being modern day readers?
Well, I think as Denise said, and as we all recognize, things have changed so much that when I had the book called The ABCs of Entrepreneurship, which is an instructional, and I went to a school with it, and the kids told me, "Ma'am, we don't read. We want in a video." So I did work with Rommel actually and some other people. I turned it into a video series, and that's how they will get this stuff. So while I do love the idea of people still reading, and that's my passion. I love to read, love to write, but we have to recognize that everybody's not like that. So as Denise said, we have to find ways to capture their imagination. And I think like making films out of our books and so on. stuff I've written, I really want to see in film to really share the history of Barbados in ways that people can more relate to. Because as I said, everybody will not read a book. So we do have to find ways to really connect with what's happening now, especially the younger people, because sometimes people read stuff and they don't know. Even when I was doing research in my book, the stuff I didn't know, and until we document, I really encourage people to journal stuff that is happening now, so that people later down. I mean, I'm so upset that they couldn't find a lot of information back in the 1800s because people didn't always write, and especially if you're a slave, you didn't write stuff, couldn't even write. So it's really important for us to journal and to share that kind of information so that people come along will be able to embrace what's happening now and see how we've changed. But we really have to adapt to the new normal. The global position is an advantage because, as Jenny said, we're now on a level playing field. We can get our stuff out there. But we also have to think of it as a business. We have to go past the art and the lovely stuff, which is great. But I'm a business person, I'm an accountant, so I still look at the bottom line. And that's something that we really have to focus on as well.
Okay. Andy, I'm gonna ask you for your final thoughts, but what I wanted to be very important to let you know that some things won't be captured digitally. Some things we will still need to get our brown paper, dog-eared edged books that we know we're going to only get from Black Rock Books, Andy.
Yes, but I actually think the Kindle is the devil's invention. I also know that when paper ages, there's a chemical interaction with the paper. It begins to smell like vanilla. So like, you can't really go around smelling your Kindle. But I also recognize that book selling, paper book selling is a kind of a dinosaur's trade. And I survive a lot on selling obscure things that will never get into electronics. Like I don't think, maybe one day somebody might put how music came to the ancient people in electronic format, but until that happens, if you want it, you got to come to a shop like mine and buy it, right? But at the same time, I mean, I don't know how long this will go on. I think it was Linda said about when we get back to normal, but Linda, I think this is normal, and I think that you got to kind of start recognizing that like it's normal, and you got to like be with it day by day.
Recalibrate.
Yeah, I don't think books are going to disappear tomorrow, but I guess like they might disappear one day. I don't know what I'm going to do about that besides sort of like grow old and die eventually, like, hey, but still, books are nice. And there are some things that you can only find in books. So like, I guess that's the trade-off. And
they're leading to a rarity, and vintage will always be in.
Yeah.
Yes, like vinyl records,
Yeah. But I mean, somebody else me vinyl records
items.
As I grow older, I grow wiser and realize I really don't know what's going on either. So like, I don't know.
Okay, Andy, thank you so much. I don't know. We talk about books seem to be going out of fashion, which was our last note. I will not harp on it, but I thought this was a fantastic session, bringing together a group of avid readers and writers, bibliophiles. I love the bookshelves behind you, Donna. Denise, sorry. I can't show you mine because I need more shelves. And I found during
small section.
during the Zoom age, everyone's bookshelf became the backdrop, and I was just figuring out how am I going to get mine up too. So not only are they great reads, they're fantastic to your decor. I never went to someone's house and you're just looking at their books and like, oh, they read that. You start to learn so much more. I see you in a different light. They still mean so much. They don't, your Kindle never tells you what anyone is reading. And I mean, how many of them are you going to actually hang on the wall?
It is true.
So books will always have a place on the wall, and books will always have a place in our hearts, especially. And there's so many more books out there to be read. We held a challenge throughout the month. I remember I put out Alvin Cummings, The World Palms Are Dying. I loved I read that one years ago when he first brought out. I thought that was fantastic. And I mean, Edison Williams has a book out. So there's still a lot more reads that we can discuss, a lot more reads that people need to get into, whether you find it digitally or whether you find it in print. And it's fantastic that in all the titles that we've looked at from Barbadian writers, how they've captured the essence of Barbadian, and anyone else from the Caribbean would say to you when they read them that they feel it has a Caribbean sense because they can also relate to those stories. And many of the persons who can tell those stories or can relate to those stories, we know they are passing. So, but we don't want the Barbadian story to die. We don't want the Barbados story to die. We cannot fulfill our future unless we know our past. We can't create the present unless we know where we have necessarily come from. And I think that's what is very important when anyone is writing a book, and what we're reading the book, it is a time capsule that adorns our walls. And I thank the panel so much for reminding us of that and telling us what we should read next, and who we should read next. And they are all persons other than Timothy Callender that we can reach out to. I haven't seen Arnold on the road recently, but you know, these are persons that we can profile, and we should thank publicly for the work that they're doing, and of course the panel for what they're doing in every which way. All of them are educators in each of their senses, and they are a wealth of knowledge. So thank you so much. I'd like to thank the Ministry of Culture for putting on another fantastic Heritage Month and this new initiative in terms of the book talk and the book club, so to speak. I look forward to seeing it again next year. Years before we would have done film, so we always engage the arts, and I think that's fantastic. So to Jaslyn, Kezia, Sharon, and the entire team, thank you so much for including us in Heritage Month, and we look forward to working with you throughout the entire year. For those who were with us for this hour and a half or so, thank you so much, and I hope you find it quite enjoyable, and I hope that they continue to host this video so that you can hear what we discussed if you missed it, or you need to have a look back about what we talked about. And of course, you'll find us all on social media, so if you want to ask us a question about any title, please reach out to us. We would love to continue the discussion. So to everyone, have a fantastic night.
Thank you for having me.
Fun.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, Dakota, and everybody. This was fun. Bye.
Thank you, Dr. Thompson.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Our Bridgetown, jewel in our crown, worldwide renowned, from Garrison to Kensington. This meeting place, this melting pot, this entry point for the builders of our nation. Historic Bridgetown and its garrison. Big it up. Our military, we celebrate for centuries of history. Tradition and culture, our heritage. Historic Bridgetown and its garrison. Our Bridgetown, jewel in our crown, worldwide renowned, from Garrison to Kensington. This meeting place, this melting pot, this entry point for the builders of our nation. Historic Bridgetown and its garrison. Big it up. Our military, we celebrate for centuries of history. Tradition and culture, our heritage. Historic Bridgetown and its garrison. Our Bridgetown, jewel in our crown, worldwide renowned, from Garrison to Kensington. This meeting place, this melting pot, this entry point for the builders of our nation. Historic Bridgetown and its garrison. Big it up. Our military, we celebrate for centuries of history. Tradition and culture, our heritage. Historic Bridgetown and its garrison. Our Bridgetown, jewel in our crown, worldwide renowned, from Garrison to Kensington. This meeting place, this melting pot, this entry point for the builders of our nation. Historic Bridgetown and its garrison. Big it up. Our military, we celebrate for centuries of history. Tradition and culture, our heritage. Historic Bridgetown and its garrison. Bridgetown, jewel in our crown, worldwide renowned, from Garrison to Kensington.
Pick it up.
This meeting place, this melting pot, this entry point for the builders of our nation. Historic Bridgetown and its garrison. Big it up. Our military, we celebrate for centuries of history.
Pick it up.
Tradition and culture, our heritage. Historic Bridgetown and its garrison.
Pick it up.
Our Bridgetown, jewel in our crown, worldwide renowned, from Garrison to Kensington.
Pick it up.
This meeting place, this melting pot, this entry point for the builders of our nation. Historic Bridgetown and its garrison. Big it up. Our military, we celebrate for centuries of history.
Pick it up.
Tradition and culture, our heritage. Historic Bridgetown and its garrison.
Pick it up.
Our Bridgetown, jewel in our crown, worldwide renowned, from Garrison to Kensington.
Pick it up.
This meeting place, this melting pot, this entry point for the builders of our nation. Historic Bridgetown and its garrison. Big it up. Our military, we celebrate for centuries of history.
Pick it up.
Tradition and culture, our heritage. Historic Bridgetown and its garrison.
Pick it up.
Our Bridgetown, jewel in our crown, worldwide renowned, from Garrison to Kensington.
Pick it up.
This meeting place, this melting pot, this entry point for the builders of our nation. Historic